1953, it was headlines in the newspaper. Secret of life had been discovered. That's what their headlines were. Secret of life had been discovered. Watson and Crookes, two scientists, had been able to unravel the DNA. They thought that when they were able to unravel the DNA and understand it a little bit more, the secret of life would have been discovered. They would know the cause of disease. They would know exactly what to do for people to prevent and recover from disease. That's 63 years ago. Has it helped? No. No, it has not helped. So what I'd like to look at today, I'd like to look at what the DNA is. It's the genetic code inside every cell in the body. I would like to look at the role it plays in the human body, and I would like to look at the role that it plays in disease. In Proverbs 14 verse 6, there's a proverb that says, "Knowledge is easy to him that understand." So when you understand the DNA, you automatically have the knowledge, what it is, its role in the body, and also its role in disease. So let's begin by looking at the DNA. We have 23 chromosomes from our mother, and we have 23 chromosomes from our father. And I'm sure we'll look at each other, our brothers, our sisters, our daughters, our sons, our relatives, and you see the different genes that have come through. So my mother's genes determine that I have light brown hair, I have light skin, I have blue eyes. My father's genes determine that I am short. Both my parents didn't get much grey hair, so I'm 63 and don't have much grey hair. So I'm sure we all do it with each other. I have 6 babies that I gave birth to. They're not babies anymore. They're all a lot bigger than me now. But their father had dark brown, dark curly hair and brown eyes. I have 3 curly-headed children, 3 straight-haired children. I have 5 blue-eyed children. I have 1 brown-eyed child. It's all in the genes, isn't it? And because nothing I do will change my height, nothing I do will change the colour of my eyes, nothing I do will change the colour of my hair, and maybe a bottle of chemicals might change a few things. It seems like a very tiny step to say, my mother died at 51, a cripple in a wheelchair with rheumatoid arthritis, so will I. But you've probably noticed I'm not dead, and I'm not a cripple in a wheelchair. Can you see why it seems like a tiny little step? But it's actually a huge step. And the study today in this area is called epigenetics, which is we can switch our genes on or off. Isn't that good news? And that explains the old saying that genetics loads the gun, but it is lifestyle that pulls the trigger. So even though I have a loaded gun towards rheumatoid arthritis, I need never pull the trigger. I need never flick the switch. Every now and then, my body knocks. A knock. What is a knock? It's a joint here. It starts to get very tender. And I know it's a bit of genetics knocking at the door, and it knocks. Now, if I were to go to the doctor and he gave me, say, some painkillers, some anti-inflammatories, what would that do to the knock? Silence. But is it still knocking? It's still knocking. But if I get a knock today, I will take some high-dose turmeric, powerful anti-inflammatory. I will grate up some ginger and I'll wrap it on the joint. Ginger's wonderful for joint inflammation, and the knock stops. And at the same time, I will put my detective hat on to find out why it began to knock. Newton's third law of motion states that to every action there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Sir Isaac Newton's third law of motion. In Proverbs 26 verse 2, the Bible says, "The curse causeless shall not come." It's Old English. It means no problem, no curse happens without a cause. I believe we all should be private investigators, investigating why these things are so. Job 26 verse 16, Go back. Job 29:16. The Bible says, "The cause I knew not, I searched out." There is always a reason. And for me to say, it's in my genes, after what I'm going to explain to you today about the genes, you will see that, can't use that excuse anymore. We all have loaded guns, and we can switch that switch on or off, depending to the conditions we give our body. Let's have a look at the DNA. There's a lot of information in the DNA. If you were to put all the information in the DNA into alphabetical language, it would fill 1,000 books with 1,000 pages and 3,000 letters on each page. That's quite amazing, isn't it? And inside every cell in the body, inside the nucleus, is all coiled up the DNA. And the DNA, if you were to pull it out, it is 2 meters long. That's quite amazing, isn't it? No wonder the psalmist said in Psalm 139, verse 14, "I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellous are thy works, for that my soul knoweth right well." In fact, Psalm 139 talks about the DNA. In verse 39, verse 13, the Bible says, it says, "Thou hast possessed my reins. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb." Verse 14 says, "I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellous are thy works, for that my soul knoweth right well." Verse 15 says, "My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance." My substance. What's my substance? My substance is basically made up of the DNA. "Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being imperfect. In thy book were all my members written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there were none of them, according to the DNA." That's how my members were made, according to the DNA. That's why my eyes are blue, because of my mother's chromosomes that I inherited. My substance was not hid from thee. It was hid from my mother because it was in the womb. "Thy substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being imperfect." We are all born with an imperfect DNA. And in a minute I'm going to show you what causes that. "Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being imperfect. In thy book are all my members written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there were none of them." Do you know, the Bible talks about a book, talks about a couple of books. And all our names are in that book. And it doesn't have to be a very big book. All it has to have in there is the DNA. We have 100 trillion cells in our body, and coiled up in the very nucleus of the cell is the DNA. What's the DNA made up of? The outside strands are made up of polysaccharides. Sounds like a complicated word, but polysaccharides basically just means many sugars. And basically everything we eat is made up of many sugars. The crossword bands is made up of amino acids. And amino acids is the breakdown from the protein that we eat. At lunchtime I had a very nice dish of lentils, brown lentils. There's my amino acids. And the glue that glues these two together is minerals. Where did I have minerals at lunchtime? Well, I had some kale. All your vegetables have minerals in them, but kale, being dark green, is particularly high in minerals. The dark green leafy vegetables, very high in minerals. Hippocrates said, "Let food be your medicine and medicine be your food," and he didn't know what I've just told you. He didn't know that the very DNA inside the nucleus of every single cell, except for our red blood cells are made in our bone marrow, but every other cell, Hippocrates didn't know that inside the nucleus of every cell is the DNA, the genetic code, the blueprint that determines who we are, our size, our colour of our skin, colour of our hair, etc., etc., etc. And we are constantly being remade according to the blueprint, according to the recipe, according to the formula inside every single cell. Our eyes are remade every 1 to 2 days. That's why if someone has eye surgery, it's usually day surgery. And if you get something in your eye, it's very important that you get it out, because within about 24 hours, new cells are growing over whatever went in, or if it's on your eyeball. The next quickest cells are the cells that line our gastrointestinal tract. Our gastrointestinal tract basically looks like this. It's lined with villi. And the new cell is made down here. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, in her book Gut and Psychology, she calls this the nursery. This is where the new cell is made. It travels up every 3 to 5 days and away it goes. So, if the cells that line our gastrointestinal tract are remade every 3 to 5 days, how come someone with irritable bowel, gastritis, how come they don't heal in, let's be generous, 2 weeks? Is that a reasonable question? I think it's a very reasonable question. That's one question I'd like to address in this presentation. We've got a new skin every month. Where does the old skin go? Isn't that why we wash our skin, our clothes, our bedding, vacuum our floor? Because we're constantly giving off dead skin. We've got a new liver under the right rib. That's about every 6 weeks. I think that's every 3 months. We've got a new set of bones. I think it takes about 2 years and we've got a totally new body. How is the new cell made? Well, all the information is in the DNA, but even though the DNA can be pulled out and curled back in, the DNA can't actually physically leave its nucleus. And so a photocopy is made. That's called RNA. An RNA, a photocopy of all the information, comes down to ribosome. Ribosome is another section in the cell where the new cell is being made. So RNA with all the information comes down to ribosome. And let's have a look at how the new gastrointestinal tract cell is made. So the information comes in to the little workshop, which is ribosome, and the new cell is made. For purposes of illustration, I'll explain it like the building of a brick wall almost. The first brick goes down. What's the first brick? The first brick is, say, tyrosine, which is an amino acid. The next brick comes in according to the pattern, according to the formula. Maybe the next brick is methionine, according to the pattern. The next brick, maybe it's phenylalanine. These are all different amino acids. And it's almost like a jigsaw. Different pieces fit into different spots according to the pattern. And the glue that glues these together is minerals. And every 3 to 5 days, out pops a new gastrointestinal tract cell. What about an irritable bowel syndrome cell? Or it could be a gastritis cell, or it could be a Crohn's disease cell. How's that made? Well, the information is in the RNA, comes down to ribosome, the little factory where the new cell is made. The first brick goes down, maybe tyrosine is present. But we've got a problem. There's a piece of information missing. The body's not sure what to put there. While it's actually determining what do we put here, there's a rogue cell. And this rogue cell is a breakdown from chemicals, maybe genetically modified foods, maybe it's a result of cooking food in a microwave, maybe it's a result of heavy metal effect on the body. It's a rogue cell, a cell that the body doesn't quite recognise and doesn't know what to do. And so as soon as there's an empty spot, this rogue cell sees its opportunity and in it dives. Maybe the next cell, methionine, is there, but we've got another problem now. Where does it fit? It's basically not sure where to go. And now we've got another problem. Another piece of information is missing. And now we've got another problem. The person's short in magnesium. a very important mineral used for over 300 different enzymic functions in the body, we're having problems. And every 3 to 5 days, out pops a new irritable bowel syndrome cell. If the formula's not right, it cannot be made right. Michael and I have been married for 20 years, and we have 4 sons and 4 daughters. We have a landscaper, we have a builder, we have carpenters, we have tilers, we've got a variety of tradesmen in our sons. And whether they be tilers, or whether they be builders, or whether they be carpenters, or whether they be landscapers, they cannot build or landscape unless they make a plan. Is that right? In fact, sometimes quite a bit of time is spent on the plan. Because if the plan's not right, it doesn't turn out. I knew a lady that used to make a beautiful cake, and everyone wanted her recipe, and whenever she gave her recipe, she'd omit one ingredient. So no one could reproduce her beautiful cake. I think it's a bit silly myself. If the recipe's not right, it cannot be made right. If the formula's not right, it doesn't work. So how essential that the DNA be right. By the way, there are enzymes that are constantly going up and down these outside strands, healing any glitches. So why aren't these healed? Well, if the person's deficient in the basic nutrients, ingredients to make those enzymes, can you see they're not there? So what causes the damage in the DNA? Let us make a list on what causes the damage. So question mark. What causes damage in the DNA? Science is now showing that 92% of DNA damage is caused by a mineral deficiency. 92%. How could Aussies be mineral deficient? Aren't Aussies eating very well? Well, some people live on fast food. There's no minerals in the fast food. But there are some people who are eating fruits and vegetables every day. I mentioned fruits and vegetables. They're probably the highest in the minerals. What we have to do is have a look at the way they're grown. And what's happening today in agriculture, the soil is used again and again and again. And what they do is they put superphosphate in the soil. The superphosphate locks up the minerals so the plant can't access the mineral. The plant is deficient. And when the human eats that plant, what is the human being? Deficient. If you want to pursue this line of study a little bit more, there's an excellent book. And this book is written by Dr. Robert Thompson, and it's called The Calcium Lie. And he does an excellent job at putting all this in a nutshell. He shows that our soil, our food, is probably 50% less of the nutrients that was in them 50 years ago. So these are some of the things that explain why so many are mineral deficient. But there's more. There are stimulants that are robbing the body of the minerals. So what stimulants are doing that? Sugar. It is said that sugar leaves our body better dressed than when it came in. And I'm not referring to the sugar cane. It has a lot of minerals. I'm referring to the pure crystallized acid that's been extracted from the sugarcane plant. It's one of the most dangerous substances ever to be introduced to the human frame. And when it comes into the body, it's quite a toxic, poisonous acid, and so it pulls on our minerals. So if a person were to have a feed of sugar and then test the urine, they would find calcium and magnesium in the urine, which has come out with the sugar to try and basically calm it down so it doesn't hurt you so much. Another stimulant that's causing DNA damage via the mineral deficiency is caffeine. I call coffee Australia's darling, yes. how Australians love their coffee. When I was a little girl, I'm a fifth generation Australian Scottish descent. My parents had tea. In fact, tea was a very common Australian drink 50 years ago. But it's been replaced now, really. I think it's the Scottish heritage, but it's you find now that the coffee is much more popular. If you want to know how toxic coffee is and you drink coffee, there's a very easy way to find out. Stop it. And you will suffer. So how can you stop it without suffering? Well, there is a way. There's a book called Caffeine Blues, and he calls it America's #1 drug. If you have 2 cups of coffee a day, you start by having, first cup, you have half a teaspoon of coffee and half a teaspoon of something like Caro or Echo or Nature's Cuppa. And every day, a little bit more of the Caro, a little bit less of the coffee. If you have 1 cup of coffee a day, within a week you can be off it pain-free. If you have 5 cups of coffee a day, it might take 3 or 4 weeks. If you want to do it quick, just come and visit Misty Mountain Health Retreat. And because of the steam baths and the juicings and everything we do, it certainly speeds it up. Did you know that children get admitted to hospital every Easter with chocolate poisoning? In fact, it's coming up, isn't it? And have you seen the newspaper articles that say, don't give the animals, the dogs and the cats, chocolate? What about the kids? Mind you, the dogs and the cats react a little bit quicker, and not every child will react. It all depends on the strength of the pancreas and the strength of the adrenal glands. And because they're children, they haven't been on the planet long enough to beat up the pancreas and the adrenal glands. So can you see the weakness comes through from the parents. So these two not only help in the taking the minerals out, sugar and caffeine of themselves can damage the DNA. So we're getting children today that are getting diabetes when they're 2. Diabetes, we've had 2 children do our program in the last 3 years. One was 9, one was 5. By the way, the good news is within 3 days they had reduced their insulin by sometimes 3/4. Just with a change on what they're eating. So what sugar's doing, it causes a dramatic high and then a dramatic low in blood sugar levels, which wears out the pancreas. So you can have parents that are eating sugar and they will give birth to children with weakened pancreatic and adrenal glands. And then you can have a young couple who are having caffeine. Let's say the lady has a cup of coffee a day and a chocolate. Maybe the guy has a Coke and a cup of coffee and maybe a chocolate biscuit. You know, with many people, that's basically the norm. Well, they can give birth to a baby that has weakened pancreatic genes and weakened adrenal glands. And because of that, they can give birth to babies who are prone to attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity. So really, a couple, ideally, should actually spend a couple of years getting their gene pool better before they conceive their baby. Now, if you're feeling sad right now because you've done everything wrong, the good news is we live in a very forgiving body. And as soon as it's given the right conditions, it starts to revive. Remember, genetics loads the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger. So not only do these two help to leach the minerals out, they in themselves can damage the DNA. More damage to the DNA, which is a stimulant, comes from the tobacco. There are 4,000 chemicals in one cigarette. And Professor Walter Veith, I attended a series of lectures by him, and he had photographs of children's lungs born to smoking parents. They had big holes in the honeycomb shapes that hold the alveoli together, and they had less alveoli because of their smoking parents. You've probably heard stories, they've been quoted to me, oh, my uncle's 90 years old and he still smokes a pipe. And my answer to that is, well, he must have been born with a strong gene pool. His mother must have done everything right. but his son will not reach 90 if he smokes a pipe. In fact, he might not even reach 60. And if his son smokes, that's the 30-year-old in Port Macquarie Hospital dying from lung cancer at 30 years of age. Another stimulant is alcohol. Children are being born with fetal alcohol syndrome to parents that have 2 drinks a week. And how often do you hear in medicine, 2 drinks a week is fine? That's like saying Roundup's fine. It's 99% water. Yes, in red wine there is an antioxidant which is quite potent, but that's what you'll find in the dark grapes and the dark grape juice. But alcohol is a neurotoxin. There is no safe dose of alcohol. So we get children being born with fetal alcohol syndrome because their parents drank alcohol before they conceived. Absolutely, definitely these 2 things can endanger the fetus. But what I'm referring to in this lecture, I'm referring to how the DNA is damaged before the parents even conceive. What also causes damage in the DNA is genetically modified foods. Genetically modified foods happen when the DNA of 2 different species are spliced together. For instance, the DNA of an Atlantic salmon, the DNA of a tomato, hoping to create a tomato that grows in the snow, but it doesn't. And there's this huge grey area. Genetically modified foods can cause cancer. What's cancer? A mutated DNA. What's my next question? Why? He's a president, Vladimir Putin. He has passed a law that any Russian who grows or sells genetically modified foods is to be considered a terrorist. Strong words. Did we ever think that would come from Russia? He's also giving land away to Russians who will grow food non-GMO organically. You can actually put his name into the internet and get the little section from his speech. And he says, we look over at the Western countries and we see, he says, they're overfed, over-medicated, over-vaccinated and getting very dulled down. How do you know if it's been genetically modified? In Australia, they don't have to say if it's genetically modified. Monsanto has a big hold on such things. If you buy organic, you can be 99% sure that it's not genetically modified, because if an organic farmer uses genetically modified seed, he loses his organic status. And you can still buy seeds that are non-hybrid. There's the Lost seed, there's Eden seeds, there's heritage seeds. We use these seeds and it's great. In the spring, instead of weeds coming up, vegetables come up. In fact, I get little lettuces coming up in the grass. I go out, dig them up and put them back in the garden. The wandering seeds. So as much as you can grow and as much as you can buy organic. The more Australians that buy organic, the more the demand, the more the supply will increase and it will become a little cheaper. If you're struggling because the organic tomato is twice the price of the conventionally grown tomato, consider this. That organic tomato has 9 times the iron than the conventionally grown tomato. You're getting more value for your money. What can also cause damage in the DNA is electromagnetic field excess. Now this is big today. How we love our computers and iPhones, very handy stuff. So when I was stuck in Port Macquarie Airport, being told that the flight had been delayed because there was a fierce storm in Sydney Airport and the whole airport had been shut down. And in a country airport, we have to wait for our plane to come from Sydney and then fly back, which explains why my absence last night. Oh, how nice it is to have that phone and to be able to dialogue. And I answer emails I spend a few hours a day on emails helping people. Oh, how I love it, no matter where I am. So it's not that we don't do technology, it's very, very safe. I know that probably tomorrow Australia will be able to hear this lecture because of technology, yeah? But be very cautious of your exposure. Do you know what the research is showing now? You get a young girl, 8, 9, 10, with her iPad on her lap. They're finding that it's affecting the eggs in her ovary that are being developed at that age, so that when she's 20 years of age, they're finding 47% of those girls are having miscarriages. So don't put it on the lap. And it's like the young man, 30 years of age, who drove his little sports car always with his iPad on his lap, doing things like this while he drove. Testicular cancer. And then the young girls who are putting their iPhones in their bra, you know, especially the sports ones. Apparently you can even buy a sports bra now with a little pocket in it for the iPhone. Breast cancer's rising in those girls. My husband's on the phone a lot, and recently we burned off a little skin cancer on right on the side where his phone is. So now he's putting his little earpieces in. So just be mindful of the danger. We are electrical people. There's a spark of electricity in every cell in the body. So be very cautious. Where we get our most electromagnetic field from is the sun, and we know that's perfect, but we know if we overdo it because the skin burns. So it's when you get the disruption in the frequencies in our body. So be very mindful of your bedroom. We spend a third of our life in that room. It's like the young girl that developed headaches because what was under her pillow while she slept every night was her phone. My brother-in-law gathers the teenagers' technology in his office overnight and charges it. Now, I'm not going to talk about one step further, which is how it's affecting eyesight, how it's affecting brain function, etc., etc. What I'm mostly doing now is showing you what damages the DNA. So be mindful of your exposure. If every child earns every minute on the iPod, is your room clean? Are all your clothes away? Are the dishes done? Etc., etc., etc. All right, 15 minutes on the iPad. In your presence. A lady came to me recently. She said, my son is 11. He's homeschooled. They live out in the bush, and she's just discovered he has an addiction to pornography. Wow, how did that happen? But I'm not talking about that area. I'm really talking about how it interferes with the frequency in every cell. Just be very cautious of your exposure. Never buy a house under the big electrical towers. It's 500 times the electromagnetic field under those towers that is normally on the earth. Be mindful of your exposure. Also, what causes damage in the DNA is chemicals. You have no say over your neighbour, but you have total say over your little castle. Go home and have a good look in your laundry cupboard and throw out all the chemicals. If my little grandchildren get into my laundry cupboard, they'll find white vinegar, sodium bicarbonate and gumption paste. And that's not going to hurt them. Many people are poisoning themselves and damaging their DNA with their exposure to chemicals. If you want to make a lot of money, become a green cleaner. You know, there's a big demand for green cleaners. And all you need is gumption, white vinegar, and enyo cloths. You know, the cloths that you really don't even need any cleaning. I met one young girl, and she was early 30s, single mother. She said she didn't want to use chemicals, so she started a green cleaning business. I met her 2 years later. She said, I have 3 people working for me now. She said, I actually never clean anymore. Because a lot of people are so busy today and they want cleaners. But many people are poisoning themselves with just their cleaning products. Never use bleach on mould. You put bleach on mould, you create one of the most toxic mixtures on the planet. And a lady in America died. My daughter lives in America, and she told me this. It was in the newspaper. A lady was cleaning a mouldy bathroom with bleach. She had all the windows and doors shut. They hadn't seen her for a while. They opened the door and she was dead. Now, many people put bleach on mould, but usually it's just a little bit, and usually the windows are open. So what can you do? Well, if you put bleach on mould, you will feed your next crop of mould, because mould is killed by bleach, but bleach feeds fungus, which is your next crop of mould. But white vinegar will kill mould and won't kill you and won't feed your next crop. So there's always something you can do. You're familiar with Shannon Lush? She's written a book called Completely Spotless. In there is everything that you can use in the way of cleaning. Also, be mindful of your food. Be mindful of the food that you're eating, that go organic as much as you can. We are not 100% organic. We do the best we can. We have a garden and we know places to go, but we do the best we can. That's all you can do. But probably the biggest chemical company in the world is the pharmaceutical company. Drugs never cure disease. They just change the form and location of the disease. The human body was designed to heal itself. And it will heal itself. Little tiny new two-letter word here. It'll heal itself if you give it the right conditions. Drugs never cure. I acknowledge in a crisis a drug may save a life, but I'm not talking about a crisis. But mind you, I've raised 8 children and we had a few crises, but we still didn't use drugs. We found lots of little natural remedies that brought relief and were able to resolve the problem. It's like when they brought my little 3-year-old grandson to me, Sonny. He just trodden on a rusty nail. Went right up into his foot through his little rubber crock. So they brought him to me and he was covered in dirt. He's a boy. So what's the first thing you do? You know, God has given us common sense, and you know, common sense isn't very common today, have you noticed? So what's the first thing you do? Wash him. Put him in the bath, wash him up. Then I grated a potato and I made a little package and I put it on the bottom of his foot and I put a bit of plastic on it and then bandaged it and put a sock on, put his shoes off and sent him off to play. That's it. Oh, one more very important thing. We always pray on the poultice. How do I know if it's not working? He will let me know. Remember the knock? Eh? It's sore. If it's sore, it's actually not doing it. And so if it's not doing it, if you're concerned, you take it to the hospital. But you know, some of those drugs, they're very damaging. But you know, it wasn't sore. So every night we put another grated potato, fresh one on. You see what potato does? It's a drawer. Tetanus can only get a hold in the body with a wound that has not healed on the inside and it's healed on the outside, and horses carry tetanus. So if there's an element of horse organism, well, we had horses here and there. So we did a poultice every night for 3 nights. Now my son brought the poultice after the 3rd night to me and said, "Mum, have a look at this." And on top of the poultice were little shaves of fluorescent metal. The potato poultice had actually pulled the metal out of his foot and cleaned up the metal. Amazing. So we didn't do anything else because it was perfectly fine. If it wasn't, it would be sore. If it wasn't, it would be swollen. And that's when you go back. Can you see how you listen and you watch, because your body will tell you what to do. If your body likes it, he'll go, "Thanks, that's good." Pain relief. If the body doesn't like it, it will still hurt, and it will certainly let you know. It's like sleeping with a baby. They say don't sleep with babies. They say it's dangerous. I slept with all my babies all night till they were about 2.5. They say you'll roll on your baby. Oh, that's crazy. Women have been sleeping with babies since time dot. It actually defies reason. If the woman's a drunk and if the woman's a drug addict, maybe we've got another problem there. But it's just common sense. And you know, I never walked the floors with babies all night because the babies were exactly where they wanted to be. It's just common sense. If a person is on drugs, some drugs need to be eased off, some drugs can't be stopped. If people want to get off their drugs, maybe then you work with a natural therapist, or you come to Misty Mountain Health Retreat and we work out alternatives on how they can be eased off. But what it's important to remember is that drugs never cure disease. They only change the form and location of the disease. And that's basically the side effects. Mould. Mould can damage the DNA. We're looking at what causes damage in the DNA. And by knowing what causes the damage in the DNA, it enables us to, of course, switch the taps or the switches on and off, whether our genes are expressed or whether they are not expressed. So mould is like genetic modification happening in nature. See, the algae, it reproduces itself through the tree that it's on. David Attenborough has a show on ants, and the ants grow mould. And the waste coming off the mould, the ants roll into little tiny balls and store. It's their food. But what David Attenborough noticed, that the ant only tends the fungus, the mould, for half an hour. Then the next ant comes on. Because if the ant tends the mould for more than half an hour, the mould can actually overtake the ant. Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? You've probably heard that truth is more amazing than fiction. So what is mould? It's a microorganism. Micro meaning microscopic, can only be seen with the naked, cannot be seen with the naked eye. Obviously, when mould is to its reproductive stage, you can see it then. Microorganisms are everywhere. They're in the air that we breathe, they're on our skin. In fact, there are more microorganisms in our body than cells, and we have 100 trillion cells in our body, and there are 10 times more microorganisms. The largest amount of microorganisms are in the gastrointestinal tract, 10 times more. Catalyst last year did a very interesting documentary called The Gut Reaction. It's a 2-part series, and they had a look at how important gut microbes are. In fact, there's quite a few books written acknowledging the importance of these microorganisms. Some say germs cause disease, but germs don't cause disease. They're the result of unhealthful conditions. Let me show you what basically germs are and mould is. They're microorganisms. Whenever cell damage happens, microorganisms now have the ability to change roles. You have a look at us. You know, I'm sure we're not dressed now the way we were dressed sleeping last night. I'm not dressed now the way I was when I was swimming my laps this morning. I'm not dressed now the way I am when I'm digging in the garden. We change roles just like the microbes according to the environment. And I'm not dressed now the way I'll be dressed in the middle of winter. In the middle of winter, I've got warm clothes on. You see, being hot or cold is another knock of the body. So these microorganisms can change roles. So whenever cell damage happens, the microorganisms now evolve or change roles and become the garbage collectors. Or you could call them the cleanup team. I call them the garbage collectors because we had a microbiologist do our program, and he said that's what we call them. And their name is bacteria. That's what bacteria is. That's what it does. These microbes are opportunist organisms. You'll just find them where you'll find a lot of waste that's got to be cleaned up. And whenever there's floods, notice on the news it says if you have a cut, don't walk in the water, because what's in the water? A lot of bacteria. Why? Because there's a lot of dead things in the water that need to be cleaned up. As the environment changes, so do the microbes. Now they become the exterminators, helping to eliminate. That's what the exterminators do. The name of the exterminators is yeast and fungus. You'll find them very busy on the rainforest floor. In fact, the rainforest floor feeds those big trees well purely because of the role of the microorganisms breaking up all the debris that falls down. It's not long after the exterminator stage that the undertakers come in. And of course the undertakers, they take away dead things. Their name is mould. That's what it is, that's what it does. And it's not long after the mould stage that the matter is now brought back to dust. A basic law of science states nothing's created, nothing's destroyed. It just changes form, and it changes form according to the environment. What I have drawn for you here is the cycle of life, or the carbon cycle. And the carbon cycle happens because of these microbes. They're the players in the cycle of life. They're the performers in the cycle of life. And if it wasn't for these microbes, there'd be so much rubbish on the planet, we wouldn't be able to walk on the planet. That's why we have compost bins, isn't it? These microbes are bringing matter back to dust. There's a Frenchman named Antoine Bourchon. He was a contemporary at the time of Pasteur, and he did not agree with Pasteur. Pasteur said germs cause disease. Bourchon said germs don't cause disease, they're the result. Florence Nightingale knew this. When she read of Pasteur's theory, she said, this is the theory of a man of a very unstable mind. And she said, and anyone who believes it is equally unstable. She said, germs don't cause disease. We should be asking ourselves, why are they there? They're just opportunist organisms. And when Florence Nightingale went into the hospital where 50% of the young men were dying in Scutari from the Crimean War, within 6 months the death rate went from 50% to 2%. And when she went back to London, they hailed her as a heroine. She said, I'm not a heroine. She said, all I did was increase hygiene, sanitation, nutrition. Did you see that? Hygiene, that's personal hygiene. Keep the body clean. Sanitation, keep the house clean. Keep the environment you live in clean. And nutrition. You cannot heal without nourishment. When I look at some supermarket trolleys, I wonder how their DNA will ever be made. Or fast food, no nutrition there. It's very basic. I'm going to show you a graph now that you will not see in any newspaper and you will not see in any magazine, maybe some health magazines. Here is all the childhood illnesses. Here is diphtheria, here is mumps, measles, rubella, here is whooping cough, polio. These diseases were sometimes 100% wiped out, sometimes 90%, sometimes 80% wiped out, and then the vaccines were introduced. I have 4 or 5 books at our health centre, and they have the graphs in them, and you have a look at where they got the graphs, medical journals. There's another graph today. It's called autism, hyperactivity, attention deficit syndrome, epilepsy, cot death. Children don't die of infectious diseases today because of Florence Nightingale. All these diseases were on the decline because of Florence Nightingale, because these microbes are just opportunist organisms. The more filth, the more waste, you'll more than find them. You look at Florence Nightingale in London in the mid-1800s. Raw sewage running down the streets. They would wash their bodies once every 6 months. Where will you find them? In the filth. She just cleaned it up. That's why she said, germs cause disease. This is the theory of a man of a very unstable mind. The diseases dropped because of increase in hygiene, sanitation, nutrition. What's this graph from? All the neurotoxins that are in the vaccines. And it is unconstitutional for the government to enforce vaccinations. Did you know that? 1946, Australians voted that the government could not legislate on medications, and they just have. Incredible, isn't it? Incredible. That's why knowledge is power. And it's very important to know why. God gave us a brain that is inquisitive. I want to know why. Why are these things so? When I was a little girl, there was a little 15-minute clips on the television of Julius Subner Miller. Those from my era would remember it. And he had a bald head with curly white hair and a big white coat. And he had a catchword, "Why are these things so?" We need to resurrect Julius Subner Miller. We need to resurrect the part of our brain that wants to know, why are these things so? Nothing happens without a cause. To blame the genes and to blame the germ is to take away all responsibility on the human being for what's happening there. Yeah? Genetics loads the gun, but it is lifestyle that pulls the trigger. Germs are opportunist organisms. You'll just find them wherever they're going to get well fed. And you can imagine how yeast, fungus and mould thrive, and bacteria, on a high sugar diet. It's important to know why. God put it in our mind and he wanted us to investigate. In his book, Biology of Belief, Bruce Lipton, he states that parents are the genetic engineers of their children. An interesting book. At one stage, he says we're all evolved, and then the next stage, he said that the DNA is a perfect design. I think you've got to make up your mind, mate. Were we designed or did we evolve? I believe the Bible account of creation, that we were created in the image of God. Not only our eyes and our nose and our ears, but our brain and our DNA. And when you give the body the right conditions, it will heal. And if it's not sick, it won't get sick. Your DNA needs you to drink enough water. It needs you to sleep in a healthy environment. It needs you to be well fed. It needs you to exercise. And it also needs you to have faith in the Creator God. Isaiah 26 verse 3, the Bible says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, he whose mind is stayed upon thee, because he trusteth in thee." It is one of the laws of health. Trust in divine power. Thank you for your attention this afternoon. I'd like to take a break now. It is 3 o'clock and we'll have another presentation at 3:30. And in this presentation where I look at cancer and its causes, I will link what we have learnt now and apply it to cancer.